concludes the business for the day. The House is adjourned.
Okay, so we have had from the man, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, presenting his maiden budget statement in Parliament today. I just want to quickly sum up for you some of the key themes that we identified here in the studio as he was speaking. But before I do that, I also wanted to tell you that before he started speaking, the rand was trading around 14.17 to the US dollar. As he began speaking and people began looking at the statement and the headlines were flying, that rand-dollar exchange rate shot up to 14.36 against the dollar. As I speak to you, as you can see, it has come back a little bit, almost like there's been a reassessment, if you like, of what the budget contains, and perhaps not as bad as many people thought it would be. In terms of focus, this is what the minister said he was trying to achieve when he presented that budget. He said he was taking tough steps to try to fix the fiscal position as well as state-owned enterprises. He also spoke about the fact that the government was spending more money on education than any other sector. On land, money has been set aside to help people to buy their own houses and support land reform as well as transfer of title deeds. On electricity, as you had, in other words, Eskom, where everybody's eyes was, he is setting aside 23 billion rand a year to support the reorganization of Eskom. It's also going to have what the minister is calling a chief reorganization officer, who's going to be the eyes of government, who will be looking at what that company is doing as they are trying to reorganize it. So that, in a nutshell, is what the minister presented. Now, in the studio with me, I have guests who will help us to understand what that budget means for you ordinary folks. I must say, one of the things that was absent from that budget was any big shocks in terms of taxation, but we shall be getting into detail of that. Let me introduce them. I have here in the studio with me, as I said, I have Aarti Takoordeen. She's the Chief Financial Officer at the JSE. Ma'am, welcome. Next to her, I have Busisiwe Mdletshe. She's CEO of BTMT Capital. Busisiwe, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Tendani Machimuli. She's a consumer economist at Liberty. Thank you, Tendani, for coming.
Thank you.
I want to begin with overall impressions. I want to know what you guys made of that budget. Before you guys came in, we had a pre-budget analysis panel here, and I asked the question, whose budget is this likely to be? Well, he has spoken, and I'm reversing the question and I'm asking the question, whose budget was that? Tendani?
I really think it was a balanced budget.
Budget balance.
You will notice that as you were speaking, there wasn't a lot of populist clapping of hands when he announced the tough measures that he really is going to take the economy through. He mentioned that we are going to take the president's role in the SONA was basically to give the nice message, you are going to take the bitter with the sweet.
Great.
The positive for consumers, though, was about there being no tax changes. We're not going to be seeing a lot of tax changes to consumer, both to consumers and business. I'm worried in terms of investors. You talk about investors.
We're going to come to that because I just wanted to overall impression. This was not a populist budget.
I don't think it was a populist budget by any means.
Are
we in an election year? Yes, we are, but I cannot really think it was populist.
Okay. All right. Let's see. We're actually being interrupted now to be told we have got our reporter, Fifi Peters. She is ready. Okay. Fifi, are you available? Okay, there we go.
Which is a good signal for investment, but it also does indicate that things are tough and therefore we need to make hard choices. And I think it depends on what people do beyond this point. Thanks.
Mr. Jonas, just lastly, it also indicates that, you know, government's debt is growing. I mean, they've moved the expenditure ceiling. The debt is expected to stabilize at a later stage. These are all red flags for a possible ratings downgrade for Moody's. I mean, are you worried?
Look, I mean, most of the issues that we're facing are not short-term issues, and they are structural, so it will take time to get over it. I think the important thing is that there is an underlying commitment to deal with the issues. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Oh, how I think we're live. We are live.
Is down in Cape Town at the precinct, and she's obviously meeting the dignitaries as they are coming out of Parliament after that budget presentation. If I saw correctly, that looked like the president of BUSA, Mbonani Mohale. I'm hoping that we'll be able to catch him and speak to him. But let's continue getting the overall views, your impressions. Guys, Busisiwe, your summary of this budget, whose budget was it?
I think it was hopeful. There was some work that went into it, you know, and you know, the minister did touch on the things that I was expecting, like reforms in the state-owned entities, you know, because we have issues there, and unless we fix the state-owned entities, which are catalysts, you know, in most economies to grow, we'll continue to suffer leaking baskets. So he did touch on measures to lift economic growth, and you know, touching on issues like agriculture, industrialization. So for me, I think it was kind of all-inclusive.
Was it for business? Was it for the poor? Was it for the voter?
I think it was for the voter, considering that there was no increase on taxes.
There were no increases in taxes in an environment where especially your revenues are short. Ma'am?
Thanks, Godfrey. I think one of our biggest challenges in this regard is the fiscal deficit. And in order to tackle that, one needs to tackle it over a number of years in incremental ways. I would have expected incremental tax charges from different spaces in order to address that fiscal drag. That is, in the absence of that, so there was none of that. There was the usual sin taxes, the usual culprits, but there wasn't any distinct move towards addressing that deficit. So I do believe that it is not a balanced budget, but it is a budget that is fit for purpose.
Is it a business for business? Is there a budget for business? Or did you get the sense he was targeting the rating agencies or the voter?
So I do think that there's an element of creating offshore investor sentiment in the positive space from the perspective of some of the elements here. So there was no shying away from the SOE conversation. There was actual tangible bullet point conversations around SAA, Denel, Eskom, and so I like that about the transparency, which is refreshing, and so that will talk to some of the investor sentiment issues that we can
talk about. We'll come back and we'll try to go into a bit of detail on that. Tenani, let's look at the overall budget numbers, and when you look at those numbers, some of them do look frightening a little bit. I did see that figure of 4.5% of the budget deficit, and I also saw someone making the reference that that's the biggest budget deficit in a decade. In addition to that, the minister also cut his growth forecast, of course, which further weakens the metrics when you look across them, because now you factor them into weaker economic growth rates. And at the same time, I did see also the money that's going into Eskom, 23 billion rand a year.
So, yeah, the numbers are not exciting. He talked about these measures that are going to put flesh on what the president said to get the economy growing again. We're looking at 0.7 for 2018, some incremental change, 2.1 for 2019, which is rather hard to believe given the fact that already sentiment in the first quarter of the year is not going to support a substantial growth rate because of the load shedding. I haven't heard anything from Eskom that says we're not going to see load shedding again. That alone, without looking at any headwind that are coming, that is a problem. He talked about the weaker global growth, which is going to impact our export capacity. For you to export, you have to have production in the country. So whether the global economy was growing, we're not going to catch that because of the domestic problem we have.
AMCU is going to shut down platinum gold industry.
Yes, mining, and you have to have something to export. So you have that, and you have the manufacturing sector working half day if you have a 4.5 hour load shedding schedule in your area. The other thing is that over the past 4 years, I think growth averaged about 1.5%. This is the time when the global economy was growing. We were not able to participate in that uplift.
We're missing that.
We missed that upward trend. Now we're talking about the global economy trending down, and we still have our own issues. I just think the 2.1% is very optimistic for 2019. And my other worry, you talked about the big numbers. Yes, is the deficit, but also the reason for that, the shortfall in revenue. I'm encouraged that there's going to be governance in SARS. He talked about the big business sector, the large business sector being the one that drove a lot of remember, we used to have years when we over-collected, where we overshot the revenue
SARS
target.
was efficient.
100%. So he said that is going to be established, I think, starting somewhere in April. That is going to be revived. So that is encouraging. That is on the governance piece. But you have to look at where the revenue comes from. It comes from collecting from the consumers. It comes from collecting from businesses. So business confidence is low. Consumer confidence is low. I'm just coming after the SONA. This ESCOM business, I think, dealt a heavy blow to growth projections.
We'll come back and talk about the other issues, but I'm getting gloomier and gloomier by the minute as you speak, because you're not painting a picture that is giving me the sense that this economy is about to take off and go in the right direction. But this way, can I come to you in terms of your overall taxation approach? What sense did you get about what the minister was trying to achieve here?
I think, like we have said, that this is an election year. We can't run away from that. You know,
he didn't cut taxes.
He didn't cut taxes, but he also didn't increase taxes. But if you look at corporate income tax, you know, he didn't even move the brackets, because they normally adjust the brackets to suit the inflation.
For inflation,
yes. But that wasn't done. But again, an increased income tax could have, you know, deterred foreign investment. Although when we gamble about reduction in income tax, you know, that would have, attracted economic growth. But now, if you look at our corporate income tax, it's sitting at 28%, and that is actually high according to international standards. So by him keeping it, it was not a bad thing. But you also look at things like personal income tax, which personal income tax, I mean, last year we suffered an increase of up to 45%, you know. This year, we're not expecting any increase there. You know,
and he didn't increase. He didn't announce any increase. What about this whole issue where some people were speaking before the budget about the potential for the minister to increase a wealth tax of some kind?
If you think about it, wealth tax, you know, it hasn't been introduced here in South Africa. But we do have
an opportunity to introduce it, do you think?
Not really, because we do have capital gains tax, that is wealth tax. Donations tax is wealth tax. Estate duty, those are all wealth taxes. So now, I mean, wealthy people suffer already from those taxes. So now, if we introduce another tax, and including that 45% bracket where we tax people who earn more than 1.5 million rands. So in my view, we already have wealth taxes.
Okay, so I heard you say suffer and wealthy people as well. Those two words together. Aarti, from the JSE perspective, you listened in. Did you hear anything that frightened you that we may not get the hot money that we require to power the JSE? For what I see, the JSE is up, but the JSE is up in part because the rand has been weaker. Yeah,
look, I don't think there's a negative view on this budget necessarily, because as I said, there's some positives in here. The addressing the transparency around each of the SOEs and just unpacking each of them and recognizing for me, for example, SARS needs to bolster its IT, its technology capability in order to collect more. It's all trending in the right direction. There's a recognition in there. Still, there's talk, and we need to convert that into execution, because that is the voice of the global investor and the local investor are saying we need to convert that talk into action. But the recognition is already good. I put a rating agency hat on and think, okay, that's great. We didn't veer away from the topics, but we did kind of tackle them and recognize its importance. I like the mention of the wage bill being managed. I like the pragmatic detail around early retirements and putting that up. That is typically what a corporate would do.
Members of parliament and officials at state-owned enterprises.
That's exactly what a corporate organization would do. We would freeze high-level salaries. We would allow for voluntary retirements. So that's in the right direction. I think that's a great positive sentiment. To be able to quantify that and understand what that would impact the wage bill would be great. That's exactly what local and global investors were looking for.
All right. Okay, we continue our conversation on the budget. Let's go to Cape Town. Fifi has caught up with Cas Kuvadia from the Banking Council of South Africa. Fifi, is he happy or is he not happy?
Do you know what, Godfrey? I'm going to get straight to it and ask him that exact question. Mr. Cas Kuvadia, if I could just ask you this question that is coming from studio right now. Are you happy or are you unhappy about this budget that has just been delivered?
Look, I'm happy about the budget. Under the circumstances, I'm happy. I think to put conditions for the utilization of funds for SOEs. The minister also laid the door open for equity contributions as and when necessary. And I think that what we now need to do is we need to make public the details of the Presidential Task Team's recommendations. We need to make public the details of how we want to break Eskom up into three and how we're going to structure that and link the funding directly to that and be transparent about it. Other than that, I think there was increases in spending for social services. I think that education again and some of the fundamental issues we need to do was addressed. The public sector compensation, I think, absolutely clear that we need to do something about it. There's a phased approach towards that. We don't have too much choice in raising income, so we've got to look at expenditure. And I think he's doing that in a responsible way. And he started by saying his job is not politics, his job is to manage finances of the country. So I think under difficult circumstances, he's done a good job.
Do you think he did a good enough job to avert a ratings downgrade by Moody's?
I think that's the point. I think that if we're saying 23 billion rand a year linked to restructuring, we've got to go into the detail and we've got to show how we're going to do that. We've got to show that the 23 billion is not going to go into the existing structure. And I think the rating agencies will look for that sort of detail and they'll appreciate that we do need to plow some money into restructure Eskom, but not some money into the hole that is there at the moment.
But I'm sure us as South African business, we need to appreciate the concerns of ratings agencies being escalating debt levels. And this is exactly what this budget has demonstrated. So I just want to ask, from your point of view as the Banking Association, are you prepared for a possible ratings downgrade from Moody's?
Look, we would, I think what we would do is we would urge Moody's to say that this was a budget under very difficult circumstances. We would urge Moody's to actually insist on transparency, detail, and how we, in the medium term, going to manage that down. But in the current context, Moody's has been more than generous, I think. In the current context, we would urge Moody's to look at the trajectory that we've set out here. The minister did say that in the 21-22, the deficit will stabilize a bit. And I think that given that we're going towards elections, given that we're out of the Zuma area, given that the President Ramaphosa is there, we need to have some space.
Mr. Takoordeen, thanks so much for your time. Godfrey, of course, that was Takoordeen, the MD of the Banking Association. Allow me to throw it back to you in studio. I'm just going to chase up on the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Lesetja Kganyago, and get a quick comment from him. See you guys back in just a moment.
Fifi Peters is live from Cape Town, where, of course, the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, has just presented his first budget statement to Parliament. In the studio with me, we're trying to understand what the Minister was trying to achieve in presenting that budget, so we continue that conversation. Tendani, if I can come to you, there was a phrase that the Minister used when he talked about the state-owned enterprises, and I wanted to read a little bit about what he says. He says, the state-owned enterprises pose very serious risks to the fiscal framework. Funding requests from SAA, SABC, Denel, Eskom, and other financially challenged state-owned enterprises have increased, with several requested state support just to continue operating. Here comes the clincher. Isn't it about time the country asks the question, do we still need these enterprises? If we do, can we manage them better? If we don't need them, what should we do? It sounded to me like this was a fundamental rethink about the role of state-owned enterprises. What impression did you get?
I would have started reading from when he quoted from Oliver Twist.
Please, can I have some more?
Can I have some, can I have some more? I thought that was very, very interesting. But what he said was that there were not going to be any holy cows, and I think he tackled it right head on. It was very courageous for the minister to do that.
Is the ANC rethinking its approach to SOEs?
Sorry?
Is the ANC rethinking its approach to SOEs?
So this has been said now for the second time in as many weeks, that you need to relook at how these things are structured, how they are funded, and how you're going to go on funding them and what they do for the country. So what he said after that was ESCOM, as we've all been waiting, will be split into 3. However, the interesting thing, remember the question last week or 2 weeks back when the president was reading the SONA was, is government going to take on ESCOM's debts? That's where I think the challenge is going to come for rating agencies, because while he says they're not taking it on, he's saying that they're going to assume the debt, but ESCOM is going to have to pay back on time. It's conditional. And importantly for me, what he did say about state-owned on SOEs is you're not going to get funding for operational expenses.
Right. Please, sir. Can I not have some more? Should become the conversation. Okay. It looks like we've been able to find one of the state-owned enterprises CEO. Let's see if we are able to join a conversation with the CEO of Vuyani Jahana. Fifi, let's see. There he is. Let's pick it up.
3 units. Just walk us through the details and the cost implications thereof.
So, firstly, the operating model for SAA has been in public domains as early as April 2018, presented to SCOA, to SCOF, to the board on a number of times. And we are not breaking up SAA into 3 companies, no. What we are doing, we're giving focus to major territories of the business. The business of SAA has got domestic, regional, which is the rest of Africa, as well as international. 70% of the revenues are coming from outside South Africa. The model, therefore, of running the company must bring effect to that kind of portfolio. So we want to have greater commercial and profit and loss accountability for the continent, for domestic and for international. So this is what will bring greater agility. And when we do so, you'll be able to drive growth in the continent as our strategy dictates so, but also make sure the international business remain profitable.
And what do you make of the introduction of a chief reorganization officer that will work hand in hand with the boards and the SOEs, or the boards and the CEOs of SAA and other SOEs like yourself who are wanting more money from government?
SAA is leading on this. I think perhaps it's that we are the template for the future, because we have a chief restructuring officer. Peter Davis works with me to actually pull together. The restructuring officer runs a transformation program almost on a project management basis, whilst we run the business as usual. So from a point of view of once we make a decision we're going to do A, B, C, D, you need somebody who's focused on tracking the change. So the CRO is a template that SAA is already running with. So we're leading in that regard.
Vuyani, thanks so much for your time. Godfrey, back to you. That was Vuyani Jahana, who's the CEO of SAA. In fact, right behind me, I do have the CEO of Deloitte, Lwazi Bam, and I'm hoping that I can just bug him just for a quick comment. Mr. Bam, this is Fifi from CNBC Africa, so we are live. Just your reaction from the budget.
I thought the minister had a lot of hard truths that he wanted us to acknowledge, that, the issue around state-owned enterprises. I like what he mentioned about asking the question, do we need the state-owned entities? And if we need them, why do we need them? Can we make them run more efficiently? So I think all those are good questions. He's obviously operating in a very difficult environment. The economy is struggling, but given the conditions that he had to work with, I think he presented a very good budget.
I mean, for companies that are coming to invest in South Africa, what will be very important is knowing that they have auditors that they can trust. And I ask this within the context that the auditing industry has made a lot of mistakes in recent years. 2019, what's your feel about how much has been done by audit firms like yourselves to improve and restore trust and good governance in the industry?
I think the issue around the auditing profession is not just a South African issue, it's a global issue. So there is a lot that's going on about how do we restore trust in the audit profession. So if you've been following what's been happening in the UK, there have been a lot of very interesting developments. And in South Africa, we're following the same route. So, for instance, some of the things that we're talking about, can we limit the market cap of audit firms? Do we need to have shared audits between small firms just to increase the pool? So the audit profession is going through a lot of introspection, and already, not just in South Africa, globally, there are a lot of very positive suggestions that are coming up about how to restore trust, including looking at the accounting standards, which are the basis for what the auditing profession does.
And just finally, Mr. Bama, I know that this is a very sensitive issue, but is there anything that you can tell us about Steinhoff?
No, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. Of course, that was Lwazi Bam, the CEO of Deloitte South Africa. I do know that Enoch Godongwana is behind me, but you know, there's also Gina Skuman. I mean, everybody's talking about the possible exclusion of South Africa from the City World Government Bond Index. Let me hand it back to you guys in studio, and I'll come back to you when I've caught up with these other individuals.
Thank you, Fifi. Continue finding them, and let's hear their voices and what they think about that budget. We're also beginning to sort of understand a little bit better about this budget and taking different perspectives. In the studio with me, let me remind you again, the ladies are here. Busisiwe, you wanted to talk a little bit about something that was there but quite wasn't there, the VAT.
You know, there were no adjustments on VAT, and we were expecting that. Not at all. I mean, it was expected because, I mean, VAT took about 25 years for them to increase from 14% to 15%.
Not an easy one.
So I expect another 25 more years. But, you know, in spite of the fact that the VAT rate is still at 15%, it is still relatively low according to the international standards. But again, considering that it's an elections year, I mean, we saw last year the trade unions were up in arms, you know, demanding that VAT should be decreased, you know. So we were not expecting anything, although maybe he could have added more zero-rated goods, you know, just to talk to the poor.
Yeah. I want to touch a little bit on something that you mentioned, and I think, Tendani, you might also want to weigh in on this one. The lack of, what do you call those things, the brackets related increases to try to take into account inflation. Zero adjustment, is that a soft way of trying to keep money within government while at the same time not, you know, doing something that would have been politically popular?
I think for me that was a surprise, considering that, as he says, we have a revenue shortfall, a quite sharp revenue shortfall, and not adjusting for bracket. Not that consumers will complain. I'm just like talking from the perspective of the fiscus.
This has been traditional.
Yes, that was quite a surprise, and to me, I don't think this was a populist budget, by the way.
It wasn't.
For me, no. But I'm saying that point there, to me, did sound like.
Have you been able to calculate how much he saves by not doing those adjustments?
No, I haven't calculated that yet.
Okay.
But for me, it was surprising, given that we have a shortfall. Maybe Busisiwe would know better than about that. But it's surprising.
Yeah.
He said he'll be saving about 12.8 billion rands. We don't
by not doing those bracket adjustments.
Yes. And I mean, if you look at the tax base, currently we have about 7 million rands people who pay tax versus the population of 56 million rands. So that is not even a fraction, you know. And considering that, you know, we have high tax rates and very little incentives. Yeah. So maybe he's trying to please people by not increasing.
You also surprised us by not increasing the fuel levies, you know?
The fuel levies, yes, but again, we have an issue of the road accident fund, you know. He did increase it, but it's at inflation rates.
Right.
Remember, during the medium-term budget, he said the liability for the RAF is increasing to about over 200 billion rands. So now where does that come from if fuel is only increasing by inflation rates?
Aarti, if I can come to you, I'm understanding that, you know, as we continue reading this budget, we begin to gain perhaps better assessments and insights into how he presented the budget. By the way, the rand has come back. All those losses that we logged immediately after he began reading, they've been wiped out. So from 1436, we're now down to about 1411. In fact, a little deeper inside where we started off. Did you get any sense of the minister looking to foreign direct investment, either for the for money that comes to the JSE or for long-term investment into the country, being a focus of this budget?
I think the single biggest contributor for the global investors is the infrastructure conversation.
Right.
So government committing 100 billion from their pockets to the infrastructure conversation is a great message out there. And it says that we're serious about having some infrastructure conversations. Let's think about innovative ways to raise funding and to be able to tackle our infrastructure issues in the country. So I think that is the single biggest positive sentiment from a global investor perspective. Global investors wanted to understand the Eskom conversation. Doesn't matter who you speak to, either locally or globally, the investors have got intimate knowledge in terms of the SOEs and particularly the majority of the problem being Eskom and Eskom's problems. And they wanted to understand, is it 100 billion? Is it 50 billion? And today he came out with it's 23 billion. So I think that's going to go down well, but I think the trick is to stick to that 23 billion and to understand what are we going to do in the short, medium and long term in terms of turning that ship around in Eskom.
Absolutely.
I think those are the two biggest investor-friendly
I'm hearing you say
contents.
that this was a positive budget for investment.
I think it's better than it could have been. It's better than it could have been. It is investor friendly, which was critical for us because remember, for 2 years in a row, in Davos, in our SA Tomorrow roadshows, or in a global context, we've been saying SA is open for business. We are, we are investor friendly country. That's one of the top priorities for the president. And so this budget needed to contextualize that and prove conviction to that sentiment. And so those two elements for me make a difference. And so let's hope that's going to move us into positive credit rating space.
Well, let's hope so.
Avert the downgrade.
So by the way, Eskom's debt, we've been using the figure of 419 billion rand, now 475 billion rand. Okay, Tendani, there are other figures that frighten me. The other one is the debt to GDP ratio. The ceiling now being seen by the minister in the medium term, just under 60%.
Yes.
Does that signal to you a lack of political will to tackle this issue of the budget deficit, as well as the indebtedness of the country?
I'm saying the minister is just stating the facts as they are. This is where we are right now. The important thing, I think, for everybody, for local South Africans and foreign investors is what are you going to do about it? Is there a credible plan to tackle that deficit? And the steps he listed in terms of what they're going to do is what I think we should look at in terms of when are you going to have that deficit? It has to come down, the debt to GDP ratio and the borrowing ceiling. He talked about taking on setting aside money to turn around the state-owned enterprises. But I think the question we need to continue asking ourselves is, if we want to keep them, what you asked earlier.
He didn't set a lot of money, that's the point that I was going to make, because I think he set aside about 6 billion rand, and we know SAA alone has been asking for more than that. SABC has been asking for a lot. We know what Eskom was looking for, 100 billion rand.
Twist. But I mean, for that to happen is conditional. We have to, we're not going to fund operational expenses. But when it came to growth projections, that is where I think the weakness is in terms of the budget, to say that how are we actually going to reduce that ceiling, that debt ceiling? Because you have to remember, they have to see the growth coming in from South African, the South African economy and revenue sources generated from within. And I haven't seen anything that tells me the budget is going to support what we are being told is going to be a 2.1% growth in the country.
In other words, you don't believe those numbers?
I think it's very, 2.1% is extremely optimistic in my opinion. He talks about the fund that is being set aside to generate employment for the youth. That is good. You're going to get some rebates if you can prove that you've employed young people. The things that he's talking about, the technology of the future, if South Africa can get into that bandwagon, that is going to be good.
I was surprised because when you referred to technology, you talked about the Reserve Bank.
So
and I am thinking, is that what we're going to do, have our technology conversation and trying to improve on that front driven by the Reserve Bank?
No, but the point he was also making is if the sub can do that, the private sector should have been on that bandwagon many years ago and should actually be driving that. But the fact that an institution like the sub can be on the forefront of this fintech technology is encouraging for me. So the technology of the future, creating jobs for employment and giving land, they touched on the land question, not in the way that maybe a lot of people expect.
Populist.
Not populist. He said we are going to set aside money to support land for people to do what?
To own it.
To farm.
Okay.
To farm. He said he's going to provide. He wants to get more South Africans to own their own homes.
Yes, have their own
something.
title deeds.
Yes, but land. It was land to farm. Not to go away on weekend specials.
And braai.
And braai. So
I do want to go and braai.
Yes, but I mean, those kind of things, if that works out, that is some shoots, some green shoots that you can look to say that is going to support.
I want us to take a little bit about the sin taxes. And I am looking at them here. 12 cents on a can of beer that's been added. And on a bottle of wine, if it cost 8 rand, now it costs 8 rand, sorry, 11 rand 15 cents, 22 cents more. Sparkling wine, 84 cents. Here's one that hurts. Whiskey, 4 rand 54.
Yes.
Could it have been worse?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at...
every year...
There's
goes every year. We need to give up, right?
In that way, though, every year it's in order of magnitude.
But I haven't done the quantum of these increases. I don't know if anyone has been able to sort of understand just how big these increases are. Above inflation, below inflation?
It's slightly above inflation, but if you look at them, you know, alcohol and tobacco, the sin tax on alcohol and tobacco, it's something that is a soft target, you know. It's
sinners anyway, so you can hit them some more, no one will make you feel sorry for them.
But it's funny when you say it's sinners, Godfrey, because if you remember the president's speech last year, you know, he became popular because of the Tumamina. And one of the lines there says, I want to be there for the alcoholics. So now if they're increasing, you know, sin tax. But again, for me, it's superficial.
Fifi apparently has caught up with the governor of the Reserve Bank, Lesecha Kganyago. Let's hear what the governor had to say about that budget. Governor number 9 talking to what Governor number 8 said.
What about on the budget, Governor?
On the budget. Did you hear the minister comment about the MPC? No.
Are you afraid that this budget might have an inflationary impact?
Ah, Fifi, please. Please.
Fifi,
please, stop it.
Governor, we are live, sir. We are live, sir.
You are alive, I'm dead.
Guys, I did try. That was the governor of the South African Reserve Bank. I mean, trying to really stay in his lane. He did say that this was the budget and therefore it was in the territory of the finance minister. Nothing was mentioned about the MPC, but I want to take you through a private conversation that we did have with the governor during a media briefing. I mean, I posed the question to him about whether the South African Reserve Bank was ready for a possible ratings downgrade, because I mean, like, we do know that the ratings agencies have been looking at those debt levels and fiscal consolidation and fiscal discipline, and this budget was kind of a mixed picture when it came to that. What Governor Kganyago did tell me is that they have put our banks, our major banks, through a serious and extreme stress tests. And basically, we do have the capability, if we do have the unfortunate result of a downgrade happening, for the banking system to weather the storm. Yes, of course, this would lead to short-term pain, particularly for consumers, but for the economy, it looks like they will be able to ensure that the economy is able to stay above water. I'll throw it back to you guys in studio.
Thank you, Fifi, and well done trying to chase the governor. Difficult, slippery fish right there. So we continue talking about this budget, and Fifi was just talking about the potential for a downgrade. And the question I have, ladies, is will this budget help South Africa escape a downgrade from Moody's, which will really take us into junk territory that everybody has been talking about? Tendani, I want you to pronounce on it. And then I also want you, Aarti, to come in from a JSE perspective, the implications of a downgrade.
I think it's on balance. I think what rating agencies have been looking for. Rating agencies has been looking for certainty. They like the fact that Eskom is going to be unbundled. It lends transparency, it's going to increase competition. The minister affirmed that. The question was if South Africa the government takes on the 400+ billion rand debt for Eskom, that is going to be problematic. He says they are not going to take on that debt. They're going to provide funding for reorganizing.
Can I tell you a secret that came into my head?
Yes.
That government is probably preparing for the privatization of Eskom, and there's no reason for them to put in money because the money is going to come from the private sector.
Well, maybe that clarity is still going to come, but what he's saying that the Eskom's debt is Eskom's debt. They're just setting aside, it must ultimately repay, they're just setting aside 23 billion to financially support Eskom when they reorganize.
Over the next 3 years.
Over the next 3 years. So what I'm saying is that I think relieves some kind of worry from the rating agency in terms of we're not going to take more debt than we can afford. However, as you said, the ceiling is just under 60%. That is worrying, and that's for me is a bit worrying in terms of are we still investment grade? Is there a positive outlook to the fortunes of the South African economy? Bit worrying, and the fact that I really think we're not in a good position in terms of seeing economic growth increase, given the fact that, as you said correctly, the trajectory for global growth is on a downward trend. But the things that he's mentioning that is going to take the economy forward, that is encouraging. So for me, it's on balance. I wouldn't be...
It may not happen.
It may not happen, but I'm just... on the Eskom side, I think they've done what they could, but on the growth projections, it's a bit...
How positive is that message on Eskom, Aarti, from your perspective, and what message it sends to foreign investors who look at South Africa?
So there's positives and negatives. The positive is that there's some indication already, not enough conviction on exactly what does that mean in terms of privatizing, okay, or not, or alluding to.
It's not strong enough, in other words.
Correct, it's not strong enough. I hope time will tell in terms of that conviction, so not sure if that's going to tip the rating agencies over. However, the positive is the finite number in terms of the 23 billion, as I said earlier, and the negative outcome from that, or the interpretation from that, is that the fiscal drag is predominantly thanks to Eskom going forward between now and 5 years hence. Right. So that's a negative sentiment. But I think the catastrophic impact of downgrade must not be shied upon. It's catastrophic.
Okay, great. Let's go back to Cape Town. Fifi has caught up with Jabu Mabuza. Fifi?
Oh, yes. Of course, I have the man of the moment right now. It's all about Eskom. I mean, I've been doing so much running around. I'm sure you guys have seen. Please excuse me for not wearing a jacket right now. But let's hear from Jabu Mabuza, who is the chairperson of Eskom. Mr. Mabuza, what the support that was announced for Eskom, was it enough?
Fifi, it has to be seen against the backdrop of the constraints within which the minister has been working. We've seen we haven't had the growth that was expected. We haven't collected the taxes that had to be collected. So we appreciate and we have to acknowledge the support from the government on this. It's support to a very key pillar of our three-pillared turnaround strategy on the debt servicing side. 23 billion is about 65% of our debt servicing. It is never going to be enough, but it is what can be found in the circumstance, which therefore means we now need to put more pressure on our operational costs and indeed on our revenues, which then says we've got to then pray that NESA gives us the tariffs that we have requested.
And I want to speak to you about that, but first I just want to ask if you're disappointed that you didn't get that 100 billion rand of debt transfer onto government's balance sheet from Eskom's balance sheet.
No, not really. We had to accept the context within which government has decided to treat our debt servicing costs. At the end of the day, it was about debt servicing costs.
And then on that NERSA tariff announcement, I mean, we are expecting that to be made in the middle of March. I mean, Mr. Mabuza, I'm sure you're well aware that many people don't think that Eskom will get its way of this 15% requested increase over the next 3 years. What then?
It's unfortunately the challenges that we're working within. We also have to continuously recognize that we borrow money at 9%. To get revenue increases at 4%, you're really on a hiding to nothing.
I know we have been crunching numbers all day, and I do understand if you don't have these numbers in your head because you've got so many more. But keeping the lights on, we do understand that specific amounts of diesel have been imported into the country to ensure that we don't have blackouts that we experienced last week. How much has that cost?
Well, diesel has to be our fallback position. It can never replace our base. So we have to continuously be sure that we've got the coal that is of the right quantity and quality to meet our demands. Diesel has to be the one that we go to when we have other pressures, and it's not always readily available, and indeed it is a costly exercise.
And you know, Mr. Mabuza, the minister did say that, you know, Eskom made the debt. Eskom needs to pay off its own debt. I just want to ask for you, how much would you like to achieve within your role as the chairperson? How much of that debt would you like to chip off Eskom's shoulder?
Look, I think the most important thing now, our focus has to be providing reliable electricity for the country, for the economy, within the constraints of what we can afford.
The Chief Reorganization Officer, what do you make about that announcement, a sort of curator for Eskom?
Well, as the minister said, apparently it's done in the private sector. So we will have to wait and see all those details. We do understand that the problems at Eskom are just now so massive. It is not going to be Eskom alone that can solve them. We need every help we can get.
I mean, you were chair of Telkom when Telkom went through its privatization process. What's stopping Eskom from doing the same and also coming out to become a darling like Telkom is?
Look, these are the one thing common about them is the com, but they are very different environment. Telkom is much smaller. If Telkom did not get through, you had other telephone and other providers. Eskom is too key, is too systemic, it's big. Eskom, if it was a listed company, it would have been one of the biggest companies on the stock exchange. It touches every aspect of our lives. The problems at Eskom have been going on for too long. They are too deep, they are too big. They would need a lot of pain, tears and sweat for us to get out of here. I will not see in my tenure a fully turned around Eskom, but I hope I would have been part of a team that have started to push the needle.
Mr. Mabuza, I mean, two final questions. I know I'm keeping you in this Cape Town sun with this humidity. Firstly, Eskom going forward, many say, can't continue with the amount of workers that it currently has. Can you give us any insights into what you plan to do with your ballooned headcount?
I think also we have to implement government policy. We state-owned. The shareholder-in-chief has already drawn a line on the sand as to which are no-go zones. So we need to continue to try and find other ways. We have started in the areas where we can to try and look at our operational costs.
And finally, I mean, Eskom is quite active in the financial markets. Just give us a sense of how you have been received and how you're expecting to be received by potential new bond investors after this budget.
I think by and large there's been big support, and thanks to all the South African banks and all the international bond holders that have backed us. So there's been a renewed support, and however, that support is not going to be evergreen. It's going to be conditional on us having to come to the party on the cost and the revenue side.
Mabuza, for your time, really appreciate it. Thank you. Of course, that was the chair of Eskom, Jabu Mabuza. Godfrey, let me throw it back to you. I mean, we were talking about banks, quite an active bank in the Eskom space that holds a bit of debt on its balance sheet is Nedbank, and we do have Mike Brown, if you'll allow me to actually take that interview right now. He has also patiently been waiting in the sun. Mr. Brown, thanks so much for your time. I mean, just a quick one. reaction to the budget is it business? Is it investor? Is it pro-growth?
Yeah, I think, if you're a realist, our country's been through an incredibly difficult period over the last number of years, and the economy is in a really tough place right now. And as a result of that, the budget's always going to be a mix of difficult compromises. So I don't think it had enough pro-growth initiatives in the budget. But that said, I think the budget was positive in terms of commitments to reform of SARS, commitments to state-owned enterprise reform, although I don't think enough is still being done around Eskom, and commitments to reduction in the public sector wage bill. But I don't think it did enough around pro-growth reforms.
What would you have liked to see around Eskom?
So I think that this is probably the start of a process that is going to take longer to resolve Eskom's challenges. 23 billion rand a year is a fraction of their interest bill on an annual basis. So it does mean that tariffs are likely to go up considerably into the future. So I think we need a much quicker acceleration of the structural reforms in Eskom around breaking Eskom up, because we do simply have too many eggs in one basket.
I mean, what is Nedbank's exposure to Eskom currently?
Yeah, so we don't talk about our exposure to any individual corporates, but the exposures to Eskom in the market are primarily asset manager exposures. The exposures of the banking system to Eskom are guaranteed by government and relatively low compared to Eskom's overall debt.
So you've given us a sense of what you would have liked to see around Eskom. You mentioned the fact that this budget wasn't pro-growth enough. What kind of growth initiatives would you have liked to see?
Yeah, so I think, certainly commitments to, for example, we talk about visas. We've been talking about visas for 2 or 3 years, and there's no real change on the ground. So we need something's going to be done by a particular date. I think it would have been really good to see something spoken about around special economic zones, something spoken about around specific tax incentives for investments and growth. So I think there's a plethora of things that could still have been done.
I mean, the president is on this massive investment drive. Would you be putting your money in this economy right now, given this budget?
Yeah, so I think the budget is broadly neutral from an investment point of view. And I think really what people are still sitting on the sides and waiting for is the outcome of the elections in May.
What about Moody's? I mean, do you think that this budget has done enough to save us from possible economic Armageddon?
Yeah, I think it's going to be close, I haven't done all of the maths, but I think the debt to GDP ratio probably peaks at around 60% now. The fiscal deficit around about 4.5%. So those are all, I think, right on the edge of what would be acceptable for an economy like South Africa. But I do think if one takes a longer term view and doesn't just look in the next 1 to 2 years, we are at the beginning of a longer term reform process that should actually be positive for economic growth and positive for our ratings.
So we might actually see a new dawn?
Yeah, I think we could. It's going to take a while, but absolutely.
All right, Mike Brown, thanks so much for your time. Godfrey, that was Nedbank CEO. Mike Brown is back to you guys in studio.
Thank you, Fifi Peters, in the Cape Town Sun, chatting to the CEOs of South Africa and some of the people who are driving business down on the ground. In the studio, my ladies are ready to run. So before you go, ladies, I need now to have your overall sense of what this budget actually meant. When you think about it, post Tito Mboweni's first budget statement, positive, negative, neutral.
Godfrey, as I said, it was fit for purpose for
fit
the
for
moment.
purpose.
Fit for purpose for the moment. South Africa has got severe socio-economic problems.
Yeah.
From a fiscal perspective, it's that fiscal deficit that we need to, the cumulative fiscal deficit that we need to address.
Yeah.
That's not a one-night game.
Sure.
We need to address it over a period of time.
Unfortunately, we've lost your microphone. I think it's just fell off, so we need to get your microphone to work. Let me get your thoughts in the meantime while she tries to fix your microphone. Yes?
I think although he didn't touch a lot on taxes, on increasing taxes, but he did say we need an additional revenue of about 15 billion rands. But, I think that would be achieved because of the controls that would be installed at SARS. I mean, talking about having a new unit for illicit trade to combat, crime. I mean, strengthening the large business center. That's one of the things also that will, help us increase tax collection. But again, all the good things that he's talking about, we need implementation programs. We mustn't just push the envelope with regards to these programs, but we need the results. And
but you're sounding positive overall.
He is sounding positive.
Positive overall. Tenani?
A lot of difficult compromises. I'm happy that he addressed the problem of not taking Eskom debt. Fiscal prudence, we saw some measures of going towards that. The salary bill is too high, reducing it. Concrete steps. We wait to see what the cabinet will look like, and hopefully it's going to do that.
Post-election, you mean?
Yes. The new cabinet, strengthening governance as SOEs.
How many do you want? 16?
16 is good. Steps to work down the fiscal debt, and as you said, fiscal prudence is the foundation of the economic 100%. Growth for this country going
Absolutely.
forward.
Final thoughts, Aarti?
Yeah, so as I said, the cumulative fiscal deficit is something that you cannot tackle in one budget speech and end of story. It's over a period of time. We've already seen some positive moves. What we need to see is that translate into action and pragmatic execution. And then we need more growth-friendly, more investor-friendly actions as well. As I said, I'm a big fan of the infrastructure, so let's see that. I look forward to seeing that play out.
Absolutely. Over the coming years, 100 billion rand the government is saying. Ladies, thank you for joining me today. And let's continue thinking about what Tito was thinking about when he was putting together that budget and what he intended to achieve. But let's go back to Cape Town. Fifi has been busy. Who has she found? She's found Colin Coleman, Goldman Sachs.